And welcome back to the Hot Lap. All the information, all the news going into the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix this weekend. Forget it pretty much, well, it's now over midnight, so first practice is today, Thursday the 7th of March, with the race on Saturday the 9th of March, qualifying being on the Friday. But I digress. Let's get into all that news. So we've got the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix at the weekend, and Max Verstappen is pretty much saying he's got no reason not to change teams. Hey, Red Bull are quite competitive, but these Max to Mercedes rumours, as you can see in the thumbnail, are not going away. But at the moment, he says no reason to leave Red Bull. Could that change? He's also come out, this is from on the BBC website, and said, my father's not a liar, in relation to all the controversial things that Max's father, Jos Verstappen, is saying, particularly about Horner. Yes, we'll get next up. Drop that bouncing. Interestingly, both Verstappen and George Russell, though we've got the current world champion and Mr. Russell, one of the Mercedes drivers, have said they need to do something about the constant bouncing. If you remember Lewis Hamilton a couple of years back suggesting that F1 drivers, if it doesn't change, are going to need to go on a walking stick by the time they are 30, addressing that bouncing. And Russell also responds to becoming Max's teammate, and he welcomes it. Pretty much, he's saying, I've done a good job against Lewis Hamilton, so bring it on, Max. So let's get into the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix news, and let's talk about Max on changing F1 teams, essentially. And the Verstappen, it says here, from motorsport.com, has said he has no reason to leave Red Bull, the F1 team, despite these Horner fears and his father's Horner fears. And he said here that the Dutchman's place in Milton Keynes base squad has been the subject, as we know, of intense speculation, intense news, particularly after father Jos Verstappen went to the press criticising Mr. Horner, Christian Horner, and strongly suggesting, let's say, that he should indeed go. And this has even fueled speculations that Verstappen's management could take Max and bring him to Mercedes, being an option as they hunt for that replacement for Lewis Hamilton. And, well, let's be fair. I don't think Max has denied it yet. And Toto Wolff hasn't denied that either. Now, facing the media in Saudi Arabia, on Wednesday, Verstappen played down any of these personal unease he had with this situation, with the ongoing situation with Red Bull. And he made it clear he did not want to get too involved in the politics surrounding the situation inside the team. Asked if he was sure that he would see out his Red Bull contract, he said that has, of course, always been the intention of signing. That's why we signed so long to be here. And, of course, it's about the performance of the car from 2026 onwards. That's a bit of a question mark over these new regulations, to be fair. But I knew that when I signed my contract, I also know what they have done for me in my career, right? So, yeah, the intention is, of course, absolutely to stay with this team because I really enjoy it. And I'm also really happy within the team. So as long as we perform, there's also no reason to leave, he says. So now, while Mercedes, as we know, they've got this clear interest in potentially capturing Verstappen. Remember, Toto Wolff let Verstappen slip through his fingers before because he couldn't offer him a job. He couldn't offer him a drive like Red Bull had. I mean, you had Nico Rosberg and Hamilton at the time. So Max Verstappen was like, okay, Christian Horner offered Max Verstappen at the time, the Toro Rosso seat. Now, interestingly, Verstappen said he could not completely rule out the possibility of ever joining that three-pointed star. He said, I think no one would have ever realised or seen that Lewis Hamilton would have moved to Ferrari. Amen. Absolutely. No, I don't think come the beginning of this year, I think everyone would have agreed with you there as well, Max. In life in general, he says, you never know what happens or what comes to you or whatever happens around you might influence you. So you can never say 100% that's how it's going to be. I approach my life like that. But he also says, I don't think about it too much. I'm very relaxed. And like I said, I'm very happy with the team. The performance is there. There's no reason to leave. So there we go. But, I mean, this is pretty much the Max and George show in a way, because next up we're going to be talking about my father's not a liar. So Max Verstappen's father, Jos, is not a liar after that Christian Horner controversy, and that's something that Max has reiterated. So as we know, Jos Verstappen last weekend in Bahrain said that the situation is not good for the team. And three-time world champion Max Verstappen said, Jos is always very outspoken. He is not a liar, that's for sure. But now the Dutchman added that he could understand if people thought his father was representing his views. He said, my dad and I are very close, Verstappen said. We call every day, even if he's not around. But I'm not a guy who likes to speak a lot about certain stuff, and I just want to focus on the driving. And if there are any issues, we try to resolve it within the team. That's is what I can say about things. For the team, it is very important we can talk about the performance of our great car. And as we know, Red Bull Barcelona has been the centre of all these accusations, inappropriate behaviour, which has been cleared from. Once again, innocent and proven guilty. Yeah. But what's interesting is Max Verstappen has pretty much come out saying his father is not a lie in relation to what he said. So some people are suggesting, not obviously Andrew Benson here, but some people have suggested that would Jos have absolutely gone out on a whim and said that without almost Max's permission? Is Jos Verstappen basically Max's talking mouth? And that's something that Max can't do whilst inside the Red Bull team. I guess we are just going to have to wait and see on that one, I think. But he says his dad's not a lie. So is that Max agreeing with that Horner thing, that Horner should go? Who knows? Once again, I think only time will tell. So next up, we're talking about dropping the bouncing. Yes, that porpoising. Ever since we've had these ground effect cars, the cars have been going up and down a lot. Not so much this year, but it's still happening. And Max Verstappen and George Russell have led calls for this major F1 car change due to health fears. So as we know, return to ground effect in 2022, porpoising was a phenomenon, proving a headache, particularly for Mercedes in 2022. If any of you remember that Baku, Lewis Hamilton struggling to get out the car. And amid concerns though, once again like Lewis Hamilton, long-term health issues, and that's something that Hamilton and even Gasly have suggested. Drivers could require a walking stick before the age of 30. Imagine that. Now, if the situation was not addressed, steps were taken by the governing body, the FIA, to largely eradicate the problem in 2023. Now, with the cars by nature, they run so close to the ground to generate what is a significant proportion of their downforce, sucking that car to the ground so they can go around the corners really, really fast. However, the low ride heights have remained an issue. How much did we see, for example, that Mercedes sparking in Bahrain? In last year, for example, that Red Bull sparking. I mean, if you remember down at Belgium, both Red Bull drivers were reportedly told going through Eau Rouge to lift because they're worried about the plank wear. I mean, and that's something that caught Mercedes out in COTA, the United States. And if you're following any of the onboard footage, you got the sound of the cars scraping along on the track surface at the end of the straights, and that was evident on board with the television coverage at this year's Bahrain Grand Prix. And reigning world champion Verstappen and George Russell, who is a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, the GPDA, are talking of taking these concerns to the FIA. And according to the BBC, Verstappen raised the subject with the FIA in Bahrain with his complaint centred on our comfort, okay, spine, yeah, quite important, and compression over the bumps, compressing that back over the bumps and doing that repeatedly. I mean, 24 weekends. So practice, qualifying, and the race, which is obviously the race, no let-up, because the race, most races range between, 1 hour and 20 minutes to 1 hour 50 minutes, depending on the track. So with F1 set for another technical overhaul in 2026, the exact rules are still yet to be finalised in June, but Verstappen said his motive for making the FIA aware is just some advice to look ahead, insisting the governing body has to revise it for the new generation of car. Itchy eye, please excuse me. Now, the end of the straight, with a full load, the impact is too high with these low ride heights. And he said, we still run very low, but I don't think the 26 car is going to be any different, he added. Mercedes star George Russell has said it's unsustainable, claiming every bump is felt by the driver's body. I guess definitely if you're in a Mercedes with the cars so close to the ground. And he explained that all the drivers have been speaking with F1 because it's a little bit unsustainable to keep running the cars like this. He said you get the most amount of performance running the car as close to the ground as possible and as stiff as possible, that really stiff suspension, feeling every curb, so you feel like your teeth are rattling around the straight, George says. So yeah, I think something obviously needs to change, But last but not least, in relation to Max Verstappen going to Mercedes, George Russell responds to this speculations over what is going to be, what could be an absolute sensational move. Imagine Lewis to Ferrari, Max to Mercedes, all in 1 year for 2025. Now, Max Verstappen has been linked to Mercedes throughout all this controversy at the Red Bull team. All sorts of speculation in relation to what's going on with Red Bull. And George Russell has said, I welcome anybody and I welcome the challenge. And George, who is going to remain at Mercedes for next year and has the backing of his team to rise to the challenge of leading them when Lewis Hamilton departs. He may even lead them this year. Did a fairly good job in Bahrain. He was asked about the possibility of Verstappen making that shock move to Mercedes. And with Russell and Verstappen having had a minor spat at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, the British driver was asked how he'd feel about the Dutch driver moving up to become his teammate. And as I said last week on Bahrain, he said, this is my third season alongside Lewis, the greatest driver of all time, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job alongside him, he said, saying he doesn't fear the prospect of the three-time F1 champion moving alongside him. So whoever were to line up alongside me next year or the years to come, I welcome anybody and welcome the challenge. He says you always want to go against the best, but ultimately, for me, I just focus on myself. I believe in myself. I believe I can beat anybody on the grid. You've just got to have that mentality. Yeah, and I think that's absolutely fantastic to have that mentality. Would George Russell beat Verstappen? I wouldn't want to bet the mortgage on it. Yes, I think Max would certainly be favourite going in, but he's done such a good job against Lewis, and I think Russell has that much wider scope to improve still, being quite young in his career. And I think he's driven a lot more difficult cars than Max. For example, in the Williams, he's aggressive. He's more aggressive, I think, than any of other Max's teammates, maybe barring down in Ricciardo. And don't forget that George Russell beat Lando Norris to the F2 Championship, in the F2 Championship even. So food for thought. I don't think it would be easy for Max to topple George Russell. And I still think that's an if. Max goes in as favourite. Once again, I wouldn't bet the farm. Anyway, that brings us to the end of some of the news. Well, all the big stuff. Anyway, going into the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. We'll be back again talking about practice, talking about our form guide, who's looking good, who's hot and who's not in F1 going into the Saudi Arabian qualifying. We'll speak to you soon. If you made it to the end, you're amazing. Like and subscribe. Click that notification button if you want more news and more updates like this. Stay tuned for F1 over the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend. Let's hope it's more exciting than Bahrain. And let's hope there's more news on the track than off it as well over the weekend. I doubt that might be the case, but fingers crossed. Thank you very much.